it'd be interesting to start out not with a wine person per se, although Rory is very definitely a wine person. He has his own winery. It's called Calder. But Rory doesn't make any Zinfandel at Calder, which is actually not surprising. I remember my son Morgan saying to me, "I'm not making Zinfandel, you've done it all." And in fact, Rory comes from incredibly zinny bloodlines. So Tres Savors is his mother, and Frog's Leap is his father. And this is what you get. You get a brilliant young man who actually knows a huge amount about viticulture. He obviously knows about winemaking too. But he also is a great emblematic vision of what kind of the next generation is, because he's done all these kinds of things. So, Rory, welcome. You have your mic.
I do.
So, tell me, if I don't fall off the stage here, that wouldn't be cool. You grew up in the wine business. You had a mother and father in the wine business, right? Huh? And when did you actually start playing around with grapes and wine?
Wow. So, I mean, I guess you could say that one side was old enough to stand the folks. They would, my folks were very busy, obviously, starting the winery when I was a little kid, and my dad and my mom would pick me up from school, and then drag us out to the crush pad because they had to crush grapes, or they had to go, take care of business until later in the afternoon. And I remember, to keep us busy, my younger siblings and I, as we were growing up, to keep us busy, they would give us a bucket of water and a paddle and just have us sit there and stir it and just go around and around until that water was well stirred.
Early biodynamics.
Yeah, exactly. Make it a compostee, and we didn't even know it. But really, it was, like you said, Joel, it was really not until coming back to the Napa Valley after having been away on the East Coast for college and gone away and looked at and worked harvests in other parts of the world that I really came back.
Tell us about college. Where'd you go to college and where'd you study?
Nothing to do with wine. It was a little college called St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland. It's a tiny little liberal arts school. It's all philosophy and books, which it was a big interest of mine when I was growing up. And I had this inkling. I mean, growing up in a wine family, you always have this inkling that grapes are something that you might want to get into at some point. I also knew that I had plenty of time to get into that, and so I wanted to do my own thing for a little while I was at St. John's, which is this, you're reading all the time. It's all, writing papers. It's obviously very intellectual. After about a couple of years, I got the itch to do something physical, and took a year off from that, went and worked in Barolo, and worked in Argentina as well for several months. And not places where they grow Zinfandel, but definitely got yelled at in a few languages I didn't quite understand at the time, and came away still loving wine. It was my kind of first exposure to really being outside of the family umbrella, and found myself just loving it.
It's one of the hallmarks of your generation, is that you've been able to go to other places where the wine business is thriving as well, and been able to work there, and you bring back stuff from there, whether you even think about it or not. It's part of it. So you didn't just stop there. You went on to do a little bit more education.
Yeah, so after St. John's, worked in Burgundy a little bit, but then did some graduate work at Cornell, not actually technically in enology or viticulture, but in flavor chemistry, which is extremely exciting. But it was interesting because this was up in the Finger Lakes region of New York, where there are lots of grapes up there, as we all know. All of the research dollars for flavor chemistry, and I knew this going into it, was from wineries up there, figuring out what the characteristic aroma of Riesling is, which means you're sniffing elutions out of a GC port for a few months, which was not super what I wanted to do with the rest of my life exactly, but it was a great way to get paid to study chemistry and come back. And after freezing my butt off for a couple of years in the Finger Lakes, that's when I came back to Napa. and worked one harvest at another winery in Napa, but then really got started with my own project, and that was when Calder started. Calder for me was kind of I make grapes like Charbonneau and Riesling, Chenin Blanc, Petit Syrah. Notably, none of them are Zinfandel. A large part of that was because I was, obviously at least auxiliary connected to Tres Sabores and Frog's Leap, both of which make Zinfandels, and had in my hands, had access to a lot of Zinfandel already. And I suppose I probably signed some sort of non-compete agreement when I got back into the business as well.
Probably when you were born. It was probably stamped on your back.
Exactly.
You didn't completely divorce yourself from your parents. You still work with them, right?
I do, and that was kind of the real revelation for me coming back into the business was that my dad is a winemaker and my mom is a winemaker, and part of that life means that they've been involved with grapes and involved with viticulture. We've been big believers in organics for 30 years now, but a lot of it was, they were coming from the winemaking side, and then that was their path to viticulture, to growing grapes. I kind of wanted it to be the other way around. I knew that there was a bit of a gap in the knowledge in my family of how do you prune a grape? How do you prune a vine? How do you assess a vine? I remember it kind of struck me growing up, after I came back, it kind of struck me that I'd always just kind of looked at vines and been, okay, it looks good. I didn't really know what a well-pruned vine looked like. It turns out the only really way to learn that is to go out there and prune them. So I spent I joined Frog's Leap officially in 2012, and I worked on the vineyard crew for 3 years every day, learning how to prune a vine, learning how to leaf a vine, learning how to manage the canopy, learning how to thin a vine, learning how to read what a vine is capable of and how it's responding to not just a particular rainy, how much rain there was that year, or how sunny it is, or how hot it is, but that particular piece of soil underneath that vine, and how is that affecting where that vine goes. That was something that I knew that was kind of my path into a new way of understanding grapes, and that was my path. That is my current path with Zinfandel. So I am a vineyard manager for Frog's Leap, and I completely manage my mom's vineyard for the Tres Sabores vineyard.
And Tres Sabores, the vine's been in the ground since how long?
1972. Yeah. The connection between the two wines here is the Tres Sabores estate is a little 7-acre Zinfandel vineyard in the middle of Rutherford that my folks bought when I was 3 years old. Bought in 1987. We moved there. The vines had already been planted for about 15 years at that point, but that was kind of our beginning with organics and our beginning with dry farming, and kind of really beginning to understand what all that was.
So you came back, you looked at this vineyard, your mom's vineyard, you worked with it for a little while, and you said, oh,
it needed a little work. It was, like I said, for years you kind of look at it and, hey, it looks good. And I came back, and after kind of building my knowledge of viticulture, realized that the vineyard needed a lot of work. It needed some tender and sometimes not so tender care of, which the vines had some eutypa, which is a trunk disease, which can eventually kill a vine if you're not careful, if it's not pruned correctly. This took the form of breaking out the chainsaw and cutting off diseased cordons.
And what was your mother's response to that?
She tried to stop me. She tried to take the chainsaw out of my hands, and I eventually just had to say, "Mom, trust me. This needs to be done, or else the vines aren't going to continue to live." And
I think you told me she burst into tears and you had to lock her in the house.
I had to give her a project elsewhere in the winery and just say, we are not fighting with a chainsaw in between us right now. That seems like a recipe for disaster.
The Napa Chainsaw Massacre.
Exactly.
It was more than a vineyard. I can see it. It's a film now.
Yeah. So it's been a huge privilege to now that initial incident was 3 years ago, and we just finished pruning the vines last week, and they are responding like we know vines can. These are old vines at this point, but they require that renewal. They require that sometimes a bit of a brutal interaction, but they're responding beautifully, and they've been producing good fruit, and they're going to be even better this year.
It's fantastic. Do you do anything with the soils? You sound like you mentioned dry farming, which I think is important. Are you doing any soil building cover crops or anything of that nature?
Oh yeah, you got to do cover crops. We plant heavy peas, oats, vetch, 3 different types of vetch. These are all nitrogen fixers, soil builders. There's lots of voluntary mustard. That's really kind of the core of organics is building, farm the soil in order to farm the vines, in order to farm the ranch. And that's kind of been a big, when we got there in '87, the grapes had been conventionally managed for several years at that point, and we decided to kind of look beyond beyond what we were told to do, and started looking for other advice, and ended up listening to a bunch of wackadoodles who we now call good friends. So the vineyard has now been dry farmed and organically grown for about 30 years. And I should mention that '87 was the first year that we ever got grapes off that ranch. So the '87 Frog's Leap Zinfandel and the 2015 Tres Sabores estate are kind of bookends of that vineyard for me, and the interaction that I've had with that vineyard in my
So you
life.
want to tell us a little bit about the 2 wines?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tres Sabores, so I should say, my folks started Frog's Leap together. They divorced in the late '90s, and now they own their own separate wineries. My stepdad also makes wine. My brother makes hard cider. I make wine. Christmas is lots of fun. So '87 was most of the fruit for this Frog's Leap 1987 Zinfandel, which I think we should maybe go through first.
That's your glass.
That's
second
wine number
glass.
2. A lot of that fruit, it's 100% Zinfandel going into this wine. Most of the fruit from that vineyard, actually in 1987, most of it actually didn't go into the Frog's Leap. A lot of it was we were barely getting by at the time, and we ended up getting a good price from Behringer for the grapes. So thank you, Ed Sprague.
White Zinfandel? White Tribidrog.
But that kind of held us on for another year while we tried to pay off the mortgage, essentially. But 100% Zinfandel. This would be pretty minimal amounts of new oak. But talking about acid freaks, I definitely think that the house palate, and I'm no exception, is to have a slightly higher acid style of Zinfandel. My dad always talks about, and now I go out when we go out and sample Zinfandel. We're not even so much, you take a berry in your mouth, you pop it in your mouth, and you're tasting for flavors. But now it's not even so much sweetness or acid as you're listening to the sound of the berry in your head as you crunch into it. And ripe Zinfandel has this crisp kind of crunch to it that I've been taught basically that means it's ripe. That usually corresponds with a little bit higher acidity, and I think our Zins, age your Zins, folks. They go the distance, and they're really beautiful wines. They tend to get a little claret-like as they get a little bit older.
So you have the '87. Was the 2015 made the same way, or have winemaking styles sort of changed? And obviously your mom may do things a little differently than your pop.
Yeah, so the '87 Frog's Leap, that would have been kind of in a stainless steel tank, pump overs. The Tres Sabores, our style now for that is a pretty minimal amount of extraction. So all these grapes get sorted and destemmed into small tea bins and then hand punch downs for a week or two until they get nice and dry, and then about 25% new oak on this. But the big thing with Zinfandel that I think we're trying to capture is just this feeling of Zinfandel is not unique, but it's defining characteristic for me. What I love about the grape is just that incredible vitality to the grape. It's got so much energy to it, and it's so friendly. It's such a happy and almost bouncy wine in that respect. And trying to capture that tension between this big exuberant fruit and keeping that energy focused is a lot of what we do. I think the Tres Sabores I often get a lot of floral notes out of, and that comes, I think, from limiting the ripeness just a little bit, and allows a lot of these complex flavors to pop out.
Great. Thank you, Rory. Yeah. That was really interesting. Thank you for giving us the sort of the basic, because every wine begins in the vineyard, and without the people who work in the vineyard and make that happen, the wine just doesn't work out too well mostly.
That's definitely true.
So thank you very much.